When we think of power, we often imagine thunder, earthquakes, or the roar of a storm. We associate power with movement, sound, intensity, and visible force. But divine power, God's power, does not need to announce itself. It does not seek attention. It does not need to prove itself, lest anyone. It is the quietest force and yet the most unshakable one in existence. Lest anyone, the world teaches us to chase strength through dominance, through control, through asserting ourselves louder than others. But the power of God flows not through the noise, but through stillness. It is in the pause between breaths. It is in the silence between our words. It is in the moments when we stop trying to fix everything and simply sit, aware, open, and present. In that stillness, you begin to sense something greater than yourself, something that cannot be seen with the eyes, but is undeniable. God's power is not the storm. It is the calm within it. The human mind has been conditioned to associate power with action, but in the spiritual dimension, true power is not measured by how much we can do, but how deeply we can listen, how still we can become, lest anyone, and how fully we can allow the divine to work through us. There is a strength that doesn't push, it invites. It doesn't react, it responds. And it doesn't compete, it simply is. Many people pray, but few are willing to sit in silence and listen. Many want blessings, lest anyone, but few are willing to trust the stillness long enough to receive them. Stillness is not passive. It is active waiting. It is the courageous decision to rest in God's presence without needing immediate results. It is letting go of the urge to control outcomes. In stillness, there is a refinement of the soul. Our pride begins to fade. Our fears begin to dissolve. Our endless thinking starts to settle. And then a new awareness rises, not from outside, but from within. This is not a power that can be earned by effort. It can only be received through surrender. It emerges when the noise within us quiets down, and suddenly what was hidden all along reveals itself. To know God's power, you must first step away from your own. You must release the illusion that you are the one holding everything together, because you are not, and you never were. Stillness is where you finally allow yourself to remember this truth. It's not weakness to be still, it's wisdom. The strongest tree is not the one that fights the wind, but the one that stands rooted no matter the storm. Stillness is the root. And from this place, God speaks, not always in words, but in clarity, in peace, in conviction, in the quiet courage to move when it is time and to wait when it is not. We live in a world where stillness is avoided. People run from silence because it confronts them with themselves. But in the silence, you are not alone. Lest anyone, you are being drawn back to your Creator. You are returning to the source. And in that space, a new kind of power fills you. Not the kind that exhausts you, but the kind that restores you. Lest anyone, not the kind that inflates the ego, but the kind that breaks it down so the soul can rise. It is a power that does not burn out because it does not come from you. It flows through you. When Moses encountered the burning bush, the voice of God didn't thunder. It simply said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground." That moment wasn't full of noise. It was full of stillness, reverence, awareness. That is the posture of someone ready to encounter divine power, not shouting, not demanding, but standing still in awe. God's power does not need spectacle. It needs space. And the only way to make space is to be still. In stillness, you learn to stop striving. You stop trying to earn your worth. You stop trying to fight battles that God never told you to fight. Instead, you trust. You let Him lead. You let Him defend. You let Him provide. It is not a lazy stillness. It is a focused, faithful stillness. A stillness that knows, be still and know that I am God. That scripture is not poetic fluff. It is a command. Because in the stillness, knowing is born, faith grows, vision clears, and that is where God works best, not when you are burnt out and frantic, but when you are surrendered and still. Even Jesus, the embodiment of divine power, often withdrew to lonely places to pray. Why? Because even He needed stillness to align with the Father. Even He, with all authority, did not run endlessly without rest. There is a lesson in that. Power does not mean constant motion. It means knowing when to move and when to be still. And often, the stillness precedes the miracle. Before He calmed the storm, Jesus was asleep in the boat, still unmoved, confident. That's divine power, not panicking with the disciples, but resting, because He knew the authority within Him. That's the kind of power God invites you into, a power rooted not in striving, but in stillness, in trust, in surrender. You don't need to force your way through life, lest anyone. You need to anchor yourself in His presence and let Him carry you. You were not meant to exhaust yourself trying to make everything happen. You were meant to partner with the one who holds everything together. And the doorway to that partnership is stillness, silent, humble, open. So next time you feel overwhelmed, remember, your breakthrough might not come through doing more. It might come through doing nothing, through pausing, through breathing, lest anyone, through waiting on God without trying to fix it all yourself. That's where you find it. That's where the power is, not in the storm, but in the stillness. Surrender is not a word we like to hear. It feels like giving up. It feels like losing control. In a world that teaches us to fight harder, push more, and hold everything together on our own, the idea of surrender seems almost offensive. Lest anyone, but if the very thing we are resisting is the one thing that would unlock the power we've been searching for all along, what if God's power is not something we can grasp through effort, but something that flows freely the moment we let go? The more we surrender, the more we access divine strength. Not because God withholds it, but because our resistance blocks it. We are like a clenched fist trying to receive water. The tighter we grip, but the less we can hold. But when the hand opens, suddenly there is space for the blessing to flow. In the same way, when we try to control everything, our future, our image, our outcomes, we are operating in our limited human power. And as long as we insist on doing it all ourselves, we do not give room for God to move. Surrender is not the absence of action. It is the presence of trust. It is moving when God says move and waiting when God says wait. It is not passive resignation. It is active alignment. When we surrender, we are saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my own plan. That is not weakness. That is the highest form of strength. Because true strength is not found in the person who carries the most, but in the one who knows what to lay down. We all carry burdens that were never meant for us. We all hold on to fears, expectations, and pressures that slowly drain us. And in our striving, we forget God never asked us to carry this alone. His power is made perfect in our weakness, not in our self-sufficiency. But you will never know that until you surrender. Surrender begins when we stop trying to earn God's love. We stop trying to perform for Him, to impress Him, or to manipulate him with our good deeds. We stop thinking that if we just pray more, do more, achieve more, maybe then we'll feel close to him. No, his love is not a reward for performance. His power is not a prize for perfection. It is a gift for the surrendered. It is given to those who say, I can't, but you can. That shift changes everything. You go from anxiety to peace, from pressure to rest, from confusion to clarity, not because life becomes easy, but because your posture has changed. You are no longer striving, you are surrendered. Some of the greatest transformations in Scripture happened after surrender. Abraham laid down his son Isaac. Moses laid down his fear. Mary laid down her reputation. Jesus laid down his life. And in every act of surrender, the divine power was released. Something beyond human capacity took over, something holy, something unstoppable. That same power is available to us, but it does not rush in until we let go of control. As long as our hands are full of our own plans, we cannot receive what God wants to place in them. Surrender also means releasing the need to understand everything. Faith is not having all the answers. It's trusting the one who does. There are moments when the path ahead makes no sense, when the doors seem closed, when prayers feel unanswered. That is when surrender becomes most powerful. Not when everything is clear, but when everything is uncertain. To say, even here, I trust you. That is surrender. That is where divine strength begins to rise within you, lest anyone, because it's not about knowing what's next. It's about knowing who holds what's next. When we surrender, our perspective changes. We no longer fight for validation from people because we know who we belong to. We no longer live in fear of the future because we trust the one who writes it. We no longer carry shame from the past because we believe in the one who redeems it. That kind of freedom does not come from striving. It comes from surrender. When we finally stop running, stop performing, stop pretending, and simply fall into the arms of grace, God's power meets us there, gently, fully, completely. A surrender is also about obedience, not the kind that is forced, but the kind that flows from love. When God prompts you to speak, do you listen? When he tells you to wait, do you trust? When he closes a door, do you still worship? These are not tests of willpower. They are invitations to surrender. Because in every act of obedience, there is a deeper release. And with every release, there is more space for his power to fill you. Lest anyone imagine a life where you are no longer trying to figure everything out on your own. Lest anyone, a life where your first instinct is not panic but prayer. A life where your strength is not measured by how much you can handle, but by how quickly you hand things over to God. And that is not just a better way to live. It is the only way to live if you want to walk in the fullness of his power. Because the truth is, you were never designed to carry the weight of the world, and you were designed to walk with the one who already does. There is freedom in surrender. There is peace in letting go. There is strength in saying, I don't know what to do, but my eyes are on you. God is not waiting for you to have it all together. He is waiting for you to come to the end of yourself, because that is where he begins. That is where his power shows up, in the quiet surrender, in the whispered prayer, in the moment when you stop trying to fix everything and start trusting the one who can. So if you feel exhausted, overwhelmed, burdened, maybe it's not because you're doing too little, but because you're doing too much in your own strength. Maybe the solution is not more striving, but more surrender. Lest anyone, maybe God's power is not something you need to chase, but something that has been waiting for you to make space. And the way you make space is simply you let go, you release the outcome, you lay it all down, you say, God, I surrender. And in that moment, heaven responds, power flows, peace returns, and you begin to walk, not in your strength, but in His. Discipline is often misunderstood in the spiritual life. People think of it as punishment or restriction, something rigid that limits joy or spontaneity. But in reality, lest anyone, discipline is the structure that holds your connection to God steady in a world that constantly pulls you in every direction. Just as a tree must send its roots deep into the soil to stand firm against the wind, your soul must be rooted in daily, lest anyone, the intentional alignment with the divine. This alignment doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen through wishful thinking. It happens through discipline, a consistent, deliberate choice to turn toward God again and again, no matter how busy, tired, or distracted you may feel. A spiritual discipline is not about legalism or earning God's favor. It's about creating space for God's power to dwell within you. Just as a vessel must be clean to carry pure water, your life must be emptied of distractions and aligned with truth to carry the fullness of divine presence. That alignment does not come naturally to a mind trained by the world. It must be cultivated. It must be sharpened. And that is the purpose of discipline, not to control, but to set free. Because when your soul is trained to walk in the ways of God, you experience a freedom that no external situation can take away. Prayers, fasting, study, meditation, worship, service, these are not rituals meant to impress God. They are exercises meant to realign you with Him. Each time you sit in silence and listen, you are not wasting time. You are tuning your heart to the frequency of heaven. Each time you read the Word, you are not simply learning. You are recalibrating your spirit to truth. Each time you deny yourself momentary comfort to obey God, you are training your inner world to yield to something greater. And over time, this training produces power, not loud, boastful power, but quiet, unshakable strength. The soul, like the body, needs conditioning. You don't build spiritual strength by accident, just as you don't build physical strength without intention. It's easy to say, I trust God, when things are calm. But when life presses you, when fear creeps in, when temptation whispers, it is the discipline of your soul that determines your response. It is what you have practiced in private that shows up in the pressure of life. That is why discipline matters. It is not about performance. It is about preparation. You prepare your soul to remain anchored in God, regardless of what storms may come. Discipline also creates clarity in a noisy world full of conflicting voices, opinions, and distractions. A disciplined soul learns how to silence the chaos and tune into the whisper of God. The noise will always be there. The question is, will you have the discipline to turn it off? Will you have the discipline to turn down the volume of the world so you can hear the voice of the one who made you? Lest anyone, that clarity doesn't come in the rush. It comes in the rhythm. It comes in the quiet consistency of showing up, lest anyone, again and again, to sit with God, even when you don't feel anything, even when the answers don't come right away. Over time, that discipline shapes you. It transforms the way you think, the way you speak, the way you move through the world. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to wait instead of worry. You begin to serve instead of strive. And none of that is accidental. It is the fruit of disciplined alignment with God. The world celebrates instant results, but the kingdom honors long obedience in the same direction. The most powerful people are not always the most gifted. They are the most faithful. They are the ones who return to the secret place day after day when no one is watching and say, God, here I am. Jesus himself practiced discipline. He withdrew often to pray. He fasted. He studied the scriptures. He served with focus. If even he, full of divine power, chose to walk in disciplined alignment with the Father, how much more should we? Discipline is not about restraining life. It is about releasing purpose, lest anyone. It is the path that keeps you aligned with what matters most, so you don't get lost in what matters least. And when you stay aligned with God, his power flows more freely through you, not because you earned it, but because you prepared for it. Lest anyone, there is a kind of peace that only comes through discipline, the peace of knowing you are in rhythm with heaven. Lest anyone, there is a confidence that grows when your life is ordered around truth, not chaos, and there is a strength that builds quietly over time, making you resilient, grounded, and unwavering. Lest anyone, that is the reward of a disciplined soul. You are no longer thrown off course by every challenge. You are no longer a slave to your emotions or circumstances. You have built a foundation, and on that foundation, God can build something eternal. Discipline also teaches humility. When you commit to consistent spiritual practices, lest anyone you confront your weaknesses. You see how easily your mind wanders, how quickly you become impatient, how often you rely on your own strength. But instead of discouraging you, this awareness becomes a gift. It reminds you that you need God every day. Discipline keeps you dependent. It keeps you teachable. And that posture of humility opens the door for grace to flood your life. You will be tempted to abandon discipline, especially when it feels dry or difficult. But the value of discipline is not in what you feel. It's in what it forms. What seeds planted in silence often bloom in seasons you never expected. The prayers you whisper today may be the strength you walk in tomorrow. Lest anyone, the word you hide in your heart now may be the answer to a battle yet to come. Lest anyone, discipline is an investment in your future alignment with God, and the returns are beyond anything this world can offer. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be faithful. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to keep showing up. Every time you choose to align with God instead of the world, you are building something invisible but powerful. You are shaping the condition of your soul, and that condition will determine your capacity to carry God's power. A life aligned through discipline is a life ready to receive, reflect, and release the divine into the world. So do not despise the slow days. Do not underestimate the quiet moments. Do not think that your daily discipline is in vain. Every small act of faithfulness, every hidden prayer, every quiet choice to return to God, it all matters. It all builds. And one day, when others wonder how you remain so strong, so calm, so full of peace, you will know the secret. It was not in a single dramatic moment. It was in the daily discipline of alignment. And in that alignment, God's power has been made manifest in your life. Ego is the false self that tries to protect us, but often ends up isolating us from truth. It tells us we are in control. Lest anyone, it whispers that we must prove our worth, that we must strive to be better than others, that we must always win, always be right, always be strong. But the more we live from ego, lest anyone, the more we separate ourselves from the power that comes only through humility and surrender. God is revealed to the proud. It is revealed when the ego finally steps aside and trust takes its place. As long as ego is in charge, we are too full of ourselves to be filled by God. But when ego dissolves, when we no longer need to protect our image or assert our control, then and only then can true power flow through us. Ego builds walls. It isolates. It makes everything about me, my plans, my pain, my progress. It's subtle and often dressed in good intentions, but it drives a wedge between us and divine power. Because God's power does not flow through pride. It flows through emptiness, through brokenness, through the heart that says, I cannot do this without you. Ego tries to be strong without God, but real strength comes from dependence on God. There is a kind of peace and power that only comes when we stop clinging to our ego and start clinging to the one who created us. Ego resists change. It wants to stay in control. It wants comfort, praise, and certainty. But walking with God often requires discomfort, surrender, and faith. Lest anyone, the path to God's power is not upward in the way the world defines success. It often feels like going lower, becoming smaller in our own eyes, admitting our need, being willing to be misunderstood, even rejected. Jesus himself took the form of a servant. He washed feet. He didn't assert his divine right. He laid it down. That is what it looks like when ego dies and trust takes over. And that is when power flows. There are moments in life when ego must be broken. It often happens through pain, through failure, through disappointment. These moments are not punishment. They are invitations. Lest anyone, they are moments when God gently or sometimes forcefully removes our illusions of control and says, will you trust me now? If we cling to ego in those moments, we become bitter, defensive, and hardened. But if we let the ego dissolve, something beautiful happens. We find that God was never asking us to be perfect or impressive. He was asking us to be real, to be empty, to be open, because his power cannot fill a heart already full of self. There is a kind of strength that can only be accessed through trust, and trust only becomes possible when ego dies. Trust says, I don't need to understand everything to keep moving. Trust says, I don't need to be seen or praised. Trust says, I don't need to control the outcome because I know who holds the outcome. Trust is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. It does not demand proof. It rests in God's presence. That is where divine power resides, not in noise or performance, but in trust. Ego is constantly comparing. It needs to feel superior or it fears being inferior. But the soul aligned with God has nothing to prove. It's not competing for attention or validation. It is content because it is rooted in truth. The ego says, look at me. But the surrendered soul says, look at him. That shift is where power is released. Because when you stop making life about your own strength, your own image, your own success, then God can truly move. You become a vessel. And vessels don't boast. They carry, they receive, and they pour out. The death of ego is not a one-time event. It is a daily process. Each day, lest anyone, we are faced with choices that either feed the ego or foster trust. Will we respond with defensiveness or with grace? Will we assert ourselves or will we serve? Will we take matters into our own hands, or will we wait on God? These small decisions are the training ground for divine power. Lest anyone, God does not entrust his power to those who seek it for their own glory. He entrusts it to those who are emptied of ego and filled with trust. Sometimes we want to be used by God in powerful ways, but we are not willing to go through the inner refinement that makes that possible. We want results, but not the process. Lest anyone, we want the platform, but not the surrender. But the journey to true power always goes through the cross. It goes through humility, through brokenness, through quiet trust. Lest anyone, it goes through moments when everything in you wants to defend yourself, control the narrative, or seek recognition. But instead, you choose to stay hidden, to stay low, to stay faithful. That is the path of power, lest anyone, and it is only visible to those who are willing to let ego go. There is a freedom that comes when you no longer have to maintain an image, when you no longer have to pretend, prove, or impress, when you can simply be. That freedom creates space for God to work. Lest anyone, when your hands are no longer gripping control, they are free to receive. Lest anyone, when your mind is no longer racing to fix everything, it becomes quiet enough to hear. And when your heart is no longer puffed up with pride, it becomes soft enough to be shaped. That is the soil where power grows. If you feel distant from God's power, ask yourself, is ego still in control? Are you trying to carry what only He can carry? Are you more focused on how you look than who you're becoming? Though the shift is simple but profound, it starts with honesty, with the willingness to admit, I cannot do this alone. I do not have all the answers. I need help. I need grace. I need God. That confession is not weakness. It is strength. It is the doorway to power, because God gives grace to the humble but resists the proud. So today, if you want to walk in power, start by letting go. Lay down the need to be seen, to be perfect, to be in control. Lay down the fear of being vulnerable. Lay down the story that says you must always be strong. And in that laying down, something sacred will rise up. Not your ego, not your image, but your true self, anchored in trust, aligned with God, lest anyone, and empowered by something far greater than anything you could ever produce on your own. This is the mystery and the miracle of the spiritual life. When ego dies, you don't lose yourself. You find your trust self. And in that self, God's power is not just present. It is alive, active, and unstoppable.